Welcome back to another episode of the Jessica Ella podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Ella, Australia's leading women's trauma therapist and founder of Aruka Therapy. And today I'm going to be talking about and breaking down the most common triggers that we have in relationships. So the first trigger, I'm just going to dive right in today. The first trigger is cheating, jealousy, infidelity. And it's something that so many women come to me with, and they realize that a lot of them realize that it's actually something internal. Some of them don't, which is where there's this fine balance, especially with this first subject, between is this actually a me issue or is my intuition actually picking up on something here? Is this person actually dodgy or am I being triggered by past events? And the reality is, if you have had betrayal and infidelity in the past, if you've not even just in your childhood, in your teen relationships or, early 20s relationships, but if you've had in childhood parents that have cheated, witnessing cheating, witnessing betrayal, this can really set this imprint of you can't trust other people. But there is two parts to this. There's the parts where sometimes we do actually attract the people who we can't trust because we believe that people aren't trustworthy. And so we magnetize those sorts of people into our lives. They feel normal and, they feel like a person that we're sort of used to being around. But then there is this other side where sometimes the trigger is coming from a wound within yourself that actually has nothing to do with the person. And I work with a lot of women who say, he's got this red flag and this red flag, and I'm not sure about this, and this felt dodgy. And you can actually see in a lot of those situations that it's them being hypersensitive because they have this underneath this, they have this insecurity. And for a lot of women, it's actually not so much about the breaking of trust in the infidelity. Once we break it down and we actually go through those layers of, what makes you feel so triggered when they're going out with their friends and they're around other women. And what it actually always comes back to is they're going to find someone better than me. They're going to find someone more beautiful than me. They're going to find someone that, is just better than me, full stop. Which, as we break down those layers, it comes back to I'm not good enough and I don't deserve this person and I'm not good enough for this person and I'm just not good enough, full stop. And actually, once we start to work on this relationship trigger, which is actually a personal trigger of them having this, this inherent worth and value and believing that they're the greatest person in the world, they're actually, those insecurities just completely drop away when their partner goes out. And I was the perfect example of this. I came from a lot of past relationships with a lot of infidelity. And so when I met my partner, Gav, in my mind, I knew that he was a good guy. And I knew that I knew that the triggers that I was having were my own, and I knew that they were erratic. And I had to go through those same layers and realize, okay, it's actually, there's just still a part of me that doesn't believe that I deserve this kind of relationship, this safe, healthy love. So I know this from experience, but I've also worked with it, as I mentioned, with so many clients. But it can be really hard without a sounding board, a person there to, to help you break this down, to know, is this actually a me issue or is there actually some red flags here? And I think that, there's a difference between evidence and the way that you're feeling and this reaction. And I think the way that I always describe it to people is that you'll have a clear, clean hit of information if something is happening. You'll have this, oh, that feels wrong. And it feels quite clear and quite direct. But when your partner's going out for drinks with their friends once a fortnight, once a month, once a week, whatever, and you're getting these huge emotional reactions, and there's actually no evidence, there's nothing actually happening. When you're having these huge emotional reactions, that's how you know that it's a past wound of yours. And there's this saying that if it's hysterical, it's historical. And it's very true. If you have a reaction to something that doesn't feel, your partner going out for drinks with their friends shouldn't have this hysterical reaction. That is like a normal, natural, healthy thing for a partner to have friends. But if you're having like it's normal to have a big reaction to a big situation, like finding another woman's underwear in your bed. That's evidence. That's something there to have a reaction to. But if it's this sort of this fear of something happening with no evidence, that's how you know that this is a wound and that it's coming from you. So this can go both ways, because I know that there are a lot of women that I've also worked with who are in relationships with men who think that they're the ones that are cheating, and they can't go out for drinks with their friends, and they feel like they're having to be, on edge all of the time because their partner's afraid that that's going to happen. And this works in reverse. There is an insecurity there coming from this wound of, I'm not good enough for this person, and I'm afraid that this person is going to find somebody better than me. And so if this is you, if you're the one who's going out, or if you're the one who is afraid of your partner who's going out, this is where I would start. This is where this trigger comes back to. And this is where you can start to look at, as you increase that self-worth and as you increase that, sense of I am enough, that trigger does actually fall away. So the second trigger is really more of a broad category. And this is relationships overall. And not so much a trigger, but it is one of the more difficult things in a relationship is you're basically blending two lives together. You're blending two people with different thought patterns, different beliefs, different histories, different wounds, different backgrounds, different ways of thinking. I mean, especially in a heterosexual relationship, I mean, you've got different biology. There's so much here in two completely unique individual human beings, and we try to blend our lives together. And the closer that we get to someone, the more that we think they should know what we're thinking. They should know what we're thinking. They should know what we need. They should know where I'm at, because you're spending so much time together. But the truth is, so many people are really good at acting or pretending that everything's fine when it's not. And vice versa, there's people that get stuck in these mentalities of being negative and being overwhelmed all the time and having this partner that they're constantly needing to rely on. We've just got these two completely different people, these two completely different worlds coming together. And we think that the other person should blend into our life, and they think that we should blend into theirs. And when in reality, it's actually finding that balance and finding that middle ground. The second part to that is that we do assume, as I said, that people can mind read. We do assume that people should know what we're thinking. But the way that two people respond to the exact same situation is so different. Our beliefs that are created in childhood throughout our past experiences create the thoughts that we have, and they basically create the blueprint for how we're going to react to any situation. And so when different situations arise in your relationship, the way that you're interpreting that situation is so different to your partner that we can never assume that we know what the other person is thinking. And this is where a lot of arguments come from. People say, I know that you think this, or I know that you think that. You actually don't know what anybody else is thinking. And your assumption of what they're thinking is based off your own projections. That's based off your own perception, your own beliefs, your own everything. So it kind of falls back to, every single relationship expert would tell you that communication is number one. Communication is key. And it is, because you can't mind read and because you don't know what's going on in someone's mind. I think as well, we have this idea that I think we've been sold this idea of like a perfect relationship and a perfect person. And we often are trying to get the person that's in the relationship to be this like perfect person. And I know that so many women that I work with, and this is going to sound so bad, but so many women that I work with say he does this and he does that and he's got this red flag and I'm not sure about this. And they are a walking list of red flags themselves. And they are so far from perfection and they're critiquing this person, expecting this person to be, to be kind and calm and all the time and communicating clearly and meeting their needs, but meeting their own needs. Like that, we're expecting this fucking unicorn of a person. And we're not that ourselves. And I often say to women, everything that you're expecting your partner to be, you need to be able to have all of those traits yourself first. And I spoke about this in another episode, but we actually need to be looking at ourselves. And if we're accepting that we're not perfect, we have to accept that our partner's not going to be perfect either. We have to accept that this person has their own individual quirks and wounds and past history, and we have to find a way to blend our lives together. And communication, as I said, is always going to be the number one thing that this comes back to, because we don't know what they're thinking or what they're feeling or, what's happening with them unless we're having those deeper conversations. So one of the biggest issues when we talk about blending the two lives is that we can come into a relationship with this like passion and excitement and lust. And a lot of people come into it without ever actually having those deeper conversations around this person's values, around what this person actually wants their life to look like. And this is where so many relationships come undone, because you've got one person who secretly wants to travel the world and one person who loves routine and is just wanting to live in one city and stay grounded. And because we have this lust and this attraction, we often skip this step of, what are your values? What are your goals? What are your dreams? What do you want your life to actually look like? And I know so many women who in that stage will kind of blend into the person that they're trying to get into a relationship with. They'll blend into their life and they'll be like, I love that too. I want to do that too. That's me. And will be really agreeable. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's actually not what I wanted at all. And we ignore this part of ourselves that has these goals and these desires because our need for connection overrides that. And this is how you know that you actually have work to do, because if you're not able to be clear and to really communicate, this is how I want my life to be, and to find somebody who matches that, it means that you have an anxious attachment style and that you're diving into the relationship because you just want that connection, not because it's actually something that something that's going to be a good relationship for you. Those good, healthy, secure relationships happen through a series of those deeper conversations and of us going, does this feel aligned? Do we have aligned values? Do we have aligned beliefs? Those things are essential so much more than your instant attraction to somebody and the sexual chemistry and the things that we just are focused on as a society. It's no wonder that there is so much issue with relationships and heartbreak, because we're coming at it from such a superficial level. So this blending of two lives, you really need to, if you're in a relationship where you feel like you're butting heads all the time and you're disagreeing, you really need to get clear. The number one focus here is to get clear on, what does your life look like? What's the ideal life look like? What does the ideal week look like before anything? And then the ideal month and the ideal year. Because, for some people, it's regular holidays. For some people, it's climbing the corporate ladder, whatever it is. We have to get so aligned on what that ideal week, month, year looks like. And it sounds so transactional when you put it like that, because we're like, no, it's love and it's what your heart wants and you just follow your heart and, you just follow your desire. But actually that only gets you so far. The right relationship, actually, you do have to be aligned on what that week and that month and that year looks like. So if you feel like this has struck a chord, maybe it's time to sit down with your partner and write out a list of values independently. Write out a list of what the ideal dream week looks like. Write out these things and share them together and see if there's ways. It doesn't mean that if you bring that together and it's opposing, that there's no way that this can work. This is where communication comes into it. And it's where, what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to budge on? What are you willing to essentially sacrifice to be able to blend your two worlds together? Because there is going to be, in every relationship, a level of sacrifice, whether that be sacrificing time together so that you can live independently in some respect, or whether that be sacrificing, I know for me in my relationship, there was 9 months where my partner was traveling around Australia, and I have kids from my previous marriage, and I wasn't able to meet him. And so in order to choose and stay in that relationship, I had to sacrifice that 9 months of time and of missing him and spending a lot of money flying out to, I mean, it was also great flying out to see him in different parts of Australia, but we had to make that sacrifice. Is the relationship worth this period of time that's going to be a bit difficult doing long distance? We had to, and it was a non-negotiable for him that he was going to do this trip. And it was a non-negotiable for me that I obviously have kids and I need to be at home with them. And so there was a level of sacrifice, but this is where we had the self-awareness for me to understand this was a really important dream of his. And I never wanted to stop him from doing something that was a dream of his. But my current reality was that I couldn't go. And so we have to make these decisions. And it doesn't mean that the relationship ends. It means that you work on, whatever you need to work on to make that happen. And for me, there was a lot of like trust involved in someone traveling around Australia, especially after coming out of relationships, again, with a lot of betrayal and infidelity. So that was a good learning experience for me. But, okay, but this is where I would start if you're looking at this blending of the two lives. The third relationship trigger, especially for couples that are living together, is the chores and the workload. So we often have this perception, and again, this comes back down to our capacity for what we can actually hold. It comes down to our perception. So we've got these, when it comes to chores and workload, we have different capacities, we have different perceptions on what's important. And a lot of the time I find with clients, one partner is doing XYZ things that they feel are important chores or important things to get done, and the other partner is doing something else that they think is important. And there's a disconnect again in communication, but also we are blending two people's childhood experiences. So for instance, a lot of people don't think about, they're like, why does my partner they only do the dishes, for instance, and I do everything else. I do the washing, I do this, I do that. But a lot of the time what's actually happening is that there was probably a part in their childhood where dishes was the thing that they got yelled at, or the dishes was the thing that their parents were always on their back about, or we've got these conditionings of like what's important and what needs to be done. I know for some people, like having the house tidy and just putting stuff in cupboards is more important than it being clean. Whereas other people need there to be no dust, no specks, no anything. Like they need it to actually be clean. I think that those preferences, they might sound like small things, but when two people are living together, this tally of chores and workload and what's important in the house comes back to our childhood experiences. It comes back to what we believe is important based off what we've been taught is important. So we have to respect the fact that this other person has these things there of this needs to be done because there's a part of them that feels like that is urgent and important, and potentially even that, everything's going to fall apart and they're not safe if they don't do that, depending on how traumatic their childhood was. But there's a balance always in relationships between they need to work on it and you need to work on it. So that we need to understand that people are the way that they are and they like things the way that they like things. And we have to blend that together. But we each also need to take personal accountability. So for instance, if I had a trigger around the dishes, we'll use as the example, around them always needing to be done. And if a partner hadn't done them and I was having this huge emotional reaction, like you left dishes in the sink again, and I'm getting angry and I'm getting frustrated, that emotional reaction to the dishes in the sink is a hysterical or overreaction to a very minor life situation. So I would then know that that's a trigger for me. And basically the way that we would want to work this is that I would want to turn down the volume on that trigger by processing why that feels like such a life-threatening situation. But I would also need to then communicate that I'm working on that, but it is a trigger. So there would be a balance again, or a sacrifice of our partner making sure that they're on top of that to a degree. So if we kind of meet somewhere in the middle where we don't have this big emotional reaction anymore, but it might still be something that we like to have done. And so it's something that they put front of mind to be in that relationship, and vice versa. We have to do this with each of these things. And again, they might sound like small things, but these are the things that literally, it's often not the big things. It's often the small micro things that work themselves up over time and build and build and build. And I know so many women that I work with that say it's not one thing that they've done. It's death by 1,000 cuts is the saying, but they've done hundreds of small things that just make me feel like they're not listening and they don't care and I'm not important. And that's the thing. It might just seem like the dishes to you, but to them, it's like they're not valuing me. They don't think I'm important. They're not listening to me. I'm not heard. It's just pulling on every wound that they have. And so we have to be understanding and compassionate, knowing that we also have those triggers, but that we're going to meet in the middle there and communicate. So it's never about the chores. It's never actually about the chores. It's never actually about those individual things. It's about the way that they're making us feel. And at the end of the day, as individuals, every single one of us is responsible for the way that we feel. We're responsible for our own emotions. We're responsible for managing those emotional reactions and those triggers. Like, you can say it's them as much as you want, but at the end of the day, them is potentially not going to change. One of the most annoying things that my mum used to say to me was, you cannot change a person. You can only change how you react to a person. And it was frustrating at the time because I was like, no, they need to change. But in reality, she was actually right. Like, there is that balance, as I said, but you can change the way that you react to situations. And the only way to do that is to go into the past. The only way to do that is to figure out where the reaction's coming from, because nothing that is in the present moment is ever untouched by the past. Like, everything is running through our filtration system of the past events of how do we respond to this situation based off the blueprint of everything that's happened in the past. It's just literally how our brain works. So we're seeing everything through that lens and through that perception. You go back and you change that perception. You go back and you change the beliefs, and all of a sudden the new filter is on and you can see that it's actually not as much of a bigger situation. But the second part here is workload. And a lot of the time I find people arguing about, I do more than you, and well, I'm staying at home with the kids. Well, I'm going out and working and then having to come home, and I'm doing the cooking and I'm doing the shopping. And there's this when people get into serious relationships, there's this balancing of workload and stress load. And again, it's so perceptive because we're not talking about actual loads. We're talking about perceived loads of stress, of tasks, of, for one person, there can be 100 tasks on their list, but it doesn't faze them because they have a regulated nervous system and they're able to tick those off. For another person, they could have 2 tasks on their list and it feels like the busiest day in the world because everything is overwhelming and it takes them all day to do those 2 tasks. So we actually, again, can't measure by the actual tasks being done, because the perceived workload or the perceived stress load on that person is completely different. And again, this comes from the past. It comes from, I used to say to women who came to me with a lot of trauma, especially women with complex trauma, that the energy that it takes to just wake up is completely different for somebody with complex trauma. Because if you imagine that there's hundreds of memories that they haven't processed, those memories we're always trying to heal. Those memories are always trying to come up. And we have to have put so much effort into just holding all of that down, that so much of your energy just gets used up by trying to cope. Like, bottom baseline, you're just trying to cope. Putting tasks on top of trying to just get through the day and cope becomes impossible. And it's impossible for someone else who doesn't have that experience to understand what it feels like to be in your body, what it feels like to be in your nervous system, what it feels like to have, the load that you have, or the stress load or the memories, to know what it feels like to hold all of that down. So we can never assume, because based off like literal logical list of tasks or list of chores, what somebody's actually experiencing. Like I said, the energy that it takes. A lot of people that have had complex trauma or just any trauma, they don't sleep well. I know that for most of my life, I woke up with clenched fists and a clenched jaw, and I woke up so tense and my whole body was exhausted from sleeping, from nightmares, and I would wake up with no energy, and every task in the day felt like just enormous. And so we have to get this understanding as well of the person's nervous system, of the person's capacity. And that's something that you choose really at the end of the day. Like if you are choosing to be in a relationship with somebody who has a low capacity, that's a choice that you make. And if you make that choice and you're a person that's got a big capacity, there's never going to be an even workload or an even, amount of chores, because the capacity of these two people is completely different. Again, I sound like I'm contradicting myself. Again, it is on that person to increase their capacity. It is on that person to process that trauma, to shift the limiting beliefs, to regulate, to heal, so that they can take on more, so that they can live a more full life. It is on them to do that, but also we can't choose to be in a relationship with someone based off the potential of who we think they can be. We have to choose them based off who they are now, assuming that they don't change. And if they do, it's a bonus. And if they do, it's great. But I think that people go in with these like rose-colored glasses on, thinking this is this and this bothers me, but we can work on that together. We can move past that. So the other triggers are more so that I wanted to speak about, are more so in relation to reactions. And it's not necessarily triggers in things that they're doing, but in the way that they're reacting to situations. So there's always a disconnect here in relationships between this person reacts to confrontation by going inward and by shutting down, which could be seen as stonewalling and just completely giving the person nothing. But the other person reacts to confrontation by moving into a fight response, and they want to communicate and they want to yell and they want to get it out, and it just puts the other person further into a stonewalling response. When we're having confrontation in relationships and when we're triggered, the way that we respond to those triggers is again based off of our childhood, our nervous system, our conditioning, our past wounds. So we need to be able to take ourselves out of this response and this personal attack of this person's just shutting me down. They're just giving me nothing, or this person is reacting to me with anger. We need to not take it personally. We need to take the personal part out of it and realize that the way that the person is reacting is the way that they've been conditioned to react. So it's not a personal response to the situation. It's not a personal on us, it's personal on them. And so in the same way that we need to look at, okay, why do I shut down? Where did I learn to shut down? Where did I learn to just completely avoid confrontation and dissociate? The other person, where did I learn to yell and scream and to go into fight mode? And how did that feel when I witnessed that as a child? And why did I pick that up? And how does that make me feel safe? If we both work on our individual reactions to confrontation and to being triggered, and we work through those, we can start to meet in the middle. And that's the only time that we can start to find this really healthy communication, is when we both take responsibility for our own individual triggers. So I'm going to leave it there today. It's a little bit longer than usual 20-minute episodes. I could go on and on forever, but I hope this episode has helped some of you to understand maybe why you are the way that you are, but also to give some compassion to the person you're in a relationship with, and understanding that we're all carrying different wounds, different pasts, different beliefs, different patterns, and that there is going to be a level of working on yourself individually, but also working on blending your lives together as partners. If you enjoyed this episode and you know somebody who needs to hear it, please send it on to them, and I will see you in the next episode.